that a person who acts in self-defense is not guilty of any crime.
Still, I don't understand what happened to my family.
Decision 2000, 4 men playing hardball with the clock winding down. And investigating a disaster, the search to find out why a log stack in Texas came tumbling down.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. The shockwaves are still being felt in New York City tonight following the acquittals in the controversial Amadou Diallo case. The news that 4 New York City police officers who killed an unarmed African immigrant in a hail of gunfire were set free brought immediate and bitter reaction, especially in minority communities. We begin our coverage with NBC's Pat Dawson.
On the morning after, New Yorkers awoke to the dramatic headline. A stark result in black and white. Not guilty on all counts. In a city of strong opinions, the reaction ranged from anger to tears.
Kill me.
None more eloquent than a mother's emotional plea.
Since I come here, it is 1 year now, I have been observing everything carefully, wanting to understand. Still, I don't understand what happened to my family.
The verdict sparked outrage and protest, but virtually no violence. Despite a series of angry standoffs, there were only a handful of arrests. On the street where Amadou Diallo was killed, small crowds gathered throughout the day to lay flowers and pray. The young African immigrant died when 4 plainclothes cops shot him 19 times, firing 41 bullets, mistaking the wallet in his hand for a gun. Today, the 4 police officers mostly stayed out of sight, but New York's mayor, though admitting the police had made a terrible mistake, said the NYPD was sensitive to minority citizens.
This police department has done more than any police department in the United States to train its police officers to be respectful. It does the job of policing imperfectly, because human beings are imperfect. But it does the job of policing better than any organization in the world.
In many minority communities, that claim fell on deaf ears. The anger here goes far beyond one shooting, beyond a single verdict of guilt or innocence. On the streets here, there are serious questions about police tactics and race, about the fundamental fairness of American justice.
We need the federal government to come into New York to deal with the matter of police today.
While the 4 officers are now absolved of criminal charges, the U.S. attorney here says she'll investigate whether the shooting violated Amadou Diallo's civil rights. The family is also likely to sue for wrongful death in civil court.
Something needs to be done about the case. Nothing can replace Amadou. Nothing can bring him back.
But for now, the 4 officers are free men, a verdict that's left many people here with a bitter feeling that justice hasn't been done. Pat Dawson, NBC News, New York.
Now, part of that feeling stems from questions about how the jury judged this case. NBC's Raheem Ellis has that part of the story.
The 4 officers filled with emotion as the racially mixed jury delivered a resounding verdict 24 times.
Not guilty. Not guilty. Not guilty. Not guilty.
Why this stunning verdict? The 4 police officers admitted they fired 41 bullets, killing an unarmed man. The officers say they were justified. Each one testifying in his own behalf, their appeal resonated with the jury.
The court reporter has located that testimony, and she will read it back to you now.
Jurors only wanted readbacks from the defense, none from the prosecution. How did the officers approach Amadou Diallo?
I held my shield up in my left hand, which I always do, and I have a phrase that I always use. Police Department, City of New York.
And why did they fire?
I just thought that he pulled and threw a weapon on my partner. I fired my weapon.
I'd seen a gun in his hand.
What may have helped the officers, the only eyewitness who lives in the neighborhood testified she heard them yell gun, suggesting they were firing in self-defense. And the judge's 4-hour instruction on the law to the jurors overwhelmingly favored the officers. One instruction was repeated again and again.
That a person who acts in self-defense is not guilty of any crime.
The jurors were apparently unmoved by the prosecutor's description of Diallo's situation.
No way it would have taken a miracle for him to survive.
After a 4-week trial, 54 exhibits, and 31 witnesses, The jurors relieved the officers, ending one of the most closely watched police trials in New York history. Rahima Ellis, NBC News, Albany.
The Diallo tragedy may also lead to changes in how police in New York City and elsewhere are trained in the use of deadly force. Our coverage continues with NBC's John Palmer.
A man in the crowd near the Diallo house in the Bronx today alluding to the fact that the 4 policemen who gunned down the victim mistook his wallet for a gun. It's a policeman's ultimate dilemma, to shoot or not to shoot.
I need to talk to you for a sec. Come here.
The 4 New York City policemen didn't have this kind of training. These police in Tampa use blanks that leave a paint mark in live scenarios, placing officers face to face with the unpredictable.
Keep your hands up and go down to your knees.
Critics say the New York Police Department needs to modernize its training because of the city's aggressive crime control tactics. Minority groups have long been concerned.
There could be no more graphic case to get the message out that the community has been trying to send for so many years, that yes, there are people that question the way the police department approaches people.
The Diallo case has also renewed discussion of the need for more sensitivity training for police officers in any big city, because they have to deal with a variety of languages and cultures and have to venture into dangerous neighborhoods.
The vast majority of police officers do not receive the type of training that would allow them to understand the dynamics of a situation that leads to the use of deadly force.
While President Clinton has made no public comment on the Diallo verdict, aides say some months ago he ordered the Justice Department to expand police ethics training at regional centers throughout the country. John Palmer, NBC News at the White House.
When NBC Nightly News continues in a moment.
I didn't hear what Pat Robertson said. I repudiate the phone call that came in.
The mean season in presidential politics. And later, in focus, working together, miles apart.
We are healthy, strong, funny, energetic, even sexy. We
could never imagine this could be a gun. There is never any justice in New York City. And it's about time people understand that things need to change.
At 42nd Street, police herded the moving crowd west towards Bryant Park. When 2 men scaled a light pole at 42nd and 6th, they marked themselves for arrest as soon as they got down. Even Chief of Department Joseph Dunn helped collar pole climber Oliver Lang.
I got up on the pole because we're alive right here, and we are protesting this gross violation of human rights.
Those arrested were searched for weapons as officers used magnetic wands, checking for anything metal. In all, police arrested at least 87 protesters.
We have over 3,000 demonstrators. It's a very sensitive issue. They've been blocking the roadway. Whenever they would block the roadway, we're making arrests.
About 500 protesters began a march to City Hall. At 23rd and 5th, firefighters had to put out a blaze in a trash can started by demonstrators. By the time the crowd got to City Hall, their numbers were equaled by the hundreds of cops securing City Hall. Those arrested are being charged with disorderly conduct. It will be hours before the 87 under arrest are finished with their processing and central booking. No police officers or demonstrators were injured in this day of angry confrontation. At City Hall, Bob O'Brien, Fox 5 News. Cynthia, back to you.
Okay, Bob, thank you very much. Well, there were rallies all over town today. A group called Rising Voices Coalition demonstrated in front of Amadou Diallo's home in the Soundview section of the Bronx. Protesters called for accountability from the government and for the immediate resignation of the Bronx District Attorney Robert Johnson. And protests against the verdict aren't only in New York City. In Newark, New Jersey, more than 100 people came out to show their support for the Diallo family. Many of the demonstrators held their wallets in the air as they chanted the words, "Don't shoot."
All the anger over the Diallo verdict has led to demands for change in police procedures. And now the mayor and the city council are turning their attention to what can be done to make sure that another tragedy like this does not happen again.
There are miles to go before we rest, and I'm going to look at this administration and say, we're looking at this mayor, Mayor Giuliani, to see what changes he implements within the police department.
The police department will make every effort to improve. It'll make every effort to do a better job of understanding the cultural differences and language and other differences that occur in this city. It will do every job to try to even improve on what it does.
At the same time, there were calls for justice in Harlem. The Reverend Al Sharpton held a rally there with Amadou Diallo's mother. Kimberly Richardson reports that they are not giving up the fight.
Amadou! No justice!
It was standing room only at National Action Network headquarters in Harlem. Reverend Al Sharpton describing the 3-hour rally as preparation for the second leg in a marathon race.
We're going back to the battlefield. We're not going to give up now. We're not going to bend. We're not going to break. We're not going to bow down. We promised Amadou we were going to get justice, and we're going to fight until we get justice.
Jurors handed down not guilty verdicts for all 4 officers involved in the shooting death of Amadou Diallo last year in the Bronx. But now many are calling for outside intervention on the federal level. Some comparing this battle to the fight for civil rights in the 60s.
That was not just an African child that got killed. That child represented our children. Our children.
The lineup of speakers, congressmen, community leaders, and activists promised Amadou's mother, despite the acquittal, her son would not die in vain. A visibly exhausted Mrs. Diallo said she still can't believe the ruling, but instead choose to look towards the future.
If his cause can help clarify this situation and help to satisfy the future generation so that the people can live in peace, I think that will be a great honor for us.
Sharpton took a swipe at Mayor Giuliani, saying his support of the verdict was like pouring salt in the wounds of the Diallo family.
Mr. Mayor, there were 12 members in the jury yesterday in Albany, but they're going to be tens of thousands in the jury November if the election comes.
Reverend Sharpton says Albany was simply a detour and that they're back on the highway to justice, calling this case an international one. And that's why that roadway will lead many here to the UN tomorrow at 2 o'clock, where Sharpton has called for 1,000 protesters to gather. In Midtown, Kimberly Richardson, Fox 5 News.
The verdict is in, but the police department and the officers involved will be feeling the repercussions of the case for a long time. Penny Crone takes a look at what's next for them. She joins us from the 19th Precinct on the Upper East Side. Penny.
Well, the 19th Precinct is very quiet tonight. At least it looks quiet, but most of the cops are out on the street doing what they do day in and day out. The Amadou Diallo trial has certainly changed a bit of the way they're working, but they're still working hard. Here's the story.
Amadou Diallo's case. Amadou Diallo's case. That's right. He's never going to have a punk.
Restraint was the word of the day for thousands of New York City cops. At today's protest, the demonstrators called the police the bad guys. They were the target of much pent-up emotion. The Amadou Diallo verdict has made the job of policing difficult and at times frightening. You seem to be having an awful lot of restraint.
Well, we always act with courtesy, professionalism, and respect, and you'll see a great example of that here today.
And this to you is just another situation in New York, I guess.
Yes, ma'am, and we'll handle it in a professional manner, as we always do.
And those sentiments are echoed by almost all law enforcement officials. For Sean Carroll, yesterday's verdict was a victory. But life goes on, and for his fellow police officers still on the job, it's not easy.
Police have had a difficult job, they'll continue to have a difficult job. You can't pay these men enough to do what they have to do and to do what you expect them to do, to try to take guns off the street, and which by definition means you're putting them in harm's way.
Being a cop in New York clearly has its rewards and pain. In March of 1996, Kevin Gillespie, a street crime officer, was shot to death in the Bronx. Police say Gillespie used restraint and never fired one shot at his killers. They were caught, and the husband and father was buried. After the Diallo shooting, the street crime unit was taken out of plain clothes and put back into uniform. Sensitivity training was the order of the day, and it still is. And once again, the street crime unit is out of uniform.
There's always room for more training, but what you have to look at is the record. And the record of the NYPD is one of the most restrained large city police departments in the United States.
Now, for most of the New York City cops that we spoke with at that demonstration and throughout the city today told me tomorrow is just another day working. Reporting live from the Upper East Side, I'm Penny Crone, Fox 5 News. Now back to you guys in the studio.
All right, Penny, thank you very much. The criminal trial may be over, but there are still more chapters to be written in the case of Amadou Diallo. There could be a civil trial, and the U.S. Attorney is reviewing all the aspects of the shooting to see if there were any violations of civil rights laws. The pictures of the paper cups on the sidewalk outside of Amadou Diallo's home stand as graphic reminders of what happened a little over a year ago. And it's this kind of evidence that federal prosecutors will consider if they decide to pursue a case that charges Diallo's civil rights were violated. Susan Carton represented the family of Anthony Baez in a wrongful death suit after Officer Francis Lavoti used a chokehold on Baez. Carton says it's likely that the feds will go after the four cops for civil rights violations.
The excessiveness of the shots, the 41 shots in and of themselves, show that there may have been a civil rights violation, and the forensic evidence may be used to prove that.
In the Rodney King case, a jury did find that L.A. police violated King's civil rights because it was shown that the cops acted with criminal intent. Some legal authorities say that it may be tough to prove that in the case of Amadou Diallo.
Federal civil rights violation case, you have to show intent. That's a very crucial element. And intent can be proved from several different ways. And one of the ways it may be proved here is from the medical and forensic evidence that was presented in that courtroom.
And a separate civil lawsuit that asks for monetary damages is a virtual certainty. Carton says that the issue of race will play a much larger role when that case goes to trial.
I think that while race was sort of hanging around the criminal prosecution up in Albany, it never really came front and center. It will now.
The four officers also face a review by the police department to see if they followed all of the rules of the police department.
Still ahead on the Fox 5 10 o'clock news, guess who's in trouble with the law again? Former Knicks star Anthony Mason. We're going to tell you what happened this time.
Plus, Sammy the Bull, we know he was busted for dealing drugs, but now we know what might have led him to that line of work.
And could there be a cure out there for baldness? We're going to show you the very latest in the search for a remedy. Joe.
Cynthia, a dense fog advisory is in effect for the entire tri-state area. I'll have details in my full forecast. It all comes up when the 10 o'clock news comes right back. Stay with us.
If you don't try to make a difference, things like this will continue to happen.
When I'm looking up and down the street, I'm just looking up and down the street. When a black man is looking up and down the street, he's acting suspicious. This is a city that is afraid of its police force, and that's not right.
It was 53rd Street before the first police in riot helmets appeared. Then as protesters began to spill out onto Fifth Avenue, reinforcements tried to force them back to the sidewalk. Anyone who resisted was arrested.
The First Amendment right of people to peacefully assemble must not be denied. First Amendment right of people to peacefully assemble must not be denied.
At 42nd and 5th, police brass apparently decided to herd the marchers into Bryant Park, literally pushing them around the corner. Cops closed down 42nd Street between 5th and 6th and tried to draw a line with motor scooters, but there weren't enough. The crowd, now swollen to perhaps 2,000 or more, just pushed on. Police seemed to be making it up as they went along until finally they got enough bodies to form a firm blue line at 42nd and 6th. As more and more cops and cars arrived, police managed finally to split up the protesters into 4 groups, pinned onto the sidewalk. For a while, it worked.
Not want to see anybody else beat down by this blue wall over here, all right? People already dispersing to walk towards 5th Avenue.
With lines of cops 3 or more deep, protesters were finally told to leave peacefully. Most did, but not all. And some people defiantly eluded police, continuing down 5th Avenue and Broadway to City Hall, where this time police were ready and waiting, a barrier impossible to cross.
4 guilty cops, 41 shots, 4 guilty cops, 41 shots.
Now, some of the protesters then marched down to Police Plaza just a short block or so away, and then they all headed back uptown in small groups and gradually dispersed. Now, tomorrow there will be another rally, this one planned by the Reverend Al Sharpton, tomorrow afternoon at the United Nations. Reporting live from One Police Plaza, Stephanie Shelton, UPN 9 News. Back to you, Coran.
Thank you for that report, Stephanie. And there was a protest rally at Diallo's apartment building on Wheeler Avenue in the Bronx today, and emotions ran high.
Kill me, because it doesn't matter. No, I wasn't. No, kill me.
Grief over the killing of Diallo, anger over the jury's verdict, and demands that Bronx District Attorney Robert Johnson resign. His office prosecuted the case against the 4 police officers. Despite the intensity of the emotions, no trouble was reported.
And the protest spread across the Hudson River to Newark, New Jersey. Demonstrators gathered at the federal courthouse. Some said they wanted to protest in New Jersey instead of joining demonstrations in New York. They said they are afraid of New Jersey police, and they cited cases of police shootings in New Jersey.
The killing of Diallo has triggered calls for change, calls for steps to prevent it from happening again. Jim Gately is live right now with that story on the Bronx Street where it all began. Jim?
Well, Coran, the end of the trial only brought about the beginning of the frustration for many people here. What they want is change, but the question is, and it's a real tough question, how do you do that?
It's not over. This is the beginning.
In the Bronx, there was frustration. Then after a year, people said nothing has changed. But what would be the next step?
We're angry, but we are bright enough and intelligent enough to channel our anger to get results.
In Harlem and at City Hall, the feeling was the same for some, that something more needed to be done.
While that trial determined the criminality of people involved, we believe that there's a wrong that still has to be righted.
But how to do that? What would make these protesters feel that progress was being made? City Council Speaker Peter Vallone suggested a weekend of prayer to promote healing. Somehow, that didn't seem like enough to many in this crowd. The 4 police officers had called the shooting of Amadou Diallo a tragic mistake, an accident. But to many demonstrators,
It's always an accident.
about the only thing that was certain today was that the Diallo case did not end with the trial in Albany.
We're not going to give up now. We're not going to bend. We're not going to break. We're not going to bow down. We promised Amadou we were going to get justice.
Amadou Diallo was shot just over a year ago. What has happened since, and the trial, which was meant to provide some closure for the case, did not do that for many people, including Diallo's mother.
I have been observing everything carefully, wanting to understand. Still, I don't understand what happened to my son.
1 year later, people in the Soundview section of the Bronx, where the shooting occurred, are still asking the same thing. Is everyone really equal in the eyes of the police?
That the city's sets of laws are not two, that the same laws that are for non-white citizens apply to white citizens.
Now it is the same thing that was asked a year ago. Is there a double standard? Now looking ahead, there could be a federal case and an internal police department investigation. Reg, back to you.
All right, that's right, Jim. And the question is, what is next? A federal investigation is already underway, along with an internal investigation by the NYPD, and there is talk of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the city by the Diallo family itself. Joanne Pileggi continues now with our team coverage with more details. Joanne.
Reg, since the shooting last year, the 4 officers have been stripped of their badges and their guns, and they were placed on modified duty, which is where they will stay until Internal Affairs and a Firearms Review Board looks into the case. But that's clearly not the end of the investigation or the end of their ordeal.
Not guilty.
As those verdicts were read, the pronouncement of not guilty 24 times in the courtroom yesterday, each of the 4 officers would show an obvious sign of relief. Cleared, each of them. But they knew then it wasn't really over.
We need the federal government to come into New York to deal with the matter of police today.
We believe that the federal civil rights of Amadou Diallo were violated.
From the pulpit of Al Sharpton's National Action Network, the call to take the Diallo case to the feds, a move already set in motion by the Justice Department, which had sent a representative to sit in and monitor the month-long trial in Albany. But in addition to any possible civil rights action the feds could take with the officers, They won't fall back into line in the elite street crimes unit either. The commissioner says the department has specifically not looked into the evidence of the case because of the criminal proceedings. Now that the trial is over, Internal Affairs and the Firearms Review Committee has its work to do.
Initially, the department will look at whether or not the officers behaved according to the standards of the department.
Traeger, you may remember, represented former officer Francis Lavoti, who was cleared of murder charges in the 1994 chokehold death of Anthony Baez in the Bronx. But Lavoti was eventually dismissed from the force and convicted of federal civil rights violations. Traeger says the Diallo case also hinges on the findings of the Firearms Review Board.
Determination by the Firearms Review Board could range from their finding that the officers reasonably discharged their weapons to a finding that they used excessive force in firing their weapons at Mr. Diallo.
To that end, the mayor and Mr. Safer promised swift review and action by the department, though both stand by the jury's decision to acquit the officers.
I wish we could go back and undo everything that happened that night. We can't do that, but we all wish that we could.
Officers Murphy, Boss, McMellon, and Carroll are not expected back at their modified duty posts for at least a week or more. There is no time frame on the department's review. As for the federal civil rights case, it'll be up to federal prosecutors to decide whether there was a gross miscarriage of justice in the state's handling of the trial. Coran.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and be sure to stay tuned to UPN 9 News. Count on us for continuing coverage of both the federal and police department investigation of the officers involving the Diallo killing as events unfold.
And we're back live here now, but as most of the demonstration has moved south, we're going to go quickly to my colleague Scott Weinberger. He is standing by live at Union Square. They're coming to him. Scott, what's happening?
Tim, we are south here, Union Square West. The park is just to the right to us. We're just north of 14th Street. And as you reported, as the demonstrators are coming south on Broadway, what they're doing is they're cutting across on 14th Street. Jim, if you can go in there, you'll see a lot of the police vehicles are now escorting these groups of people south. And we hear that they're heading towards One Police Plaza. Now, they seem to be splintering off in several groups of about 200 to 300 at a time. The police are trying to keep the traffic moving, so what they're doing is they're blocking off 2 or 3 blocks at one time, letting them go across major intersections like 14th Street, and then letting the traffic go and then bringing more people across. But we've seen about 500 to 600 people just in the last, say, 15 minutes. A lot of police officers here, a lot of Midtown South traffic officers trying to keep all of this traffic going amongst this demonstration. We're live on 14th, just north of 14th Street. Scott Weinberger, News Channel 4. Linda?
All right, thank you very much, Scott.
Well, police have also gathered outside the building where Amadou Diallo was killed in the Soundview section of the Bronx. Let's go to Darlene Rodriguez. She is on Wheeler Avenue with that part of the story. Darlene?
Well, Glenn, contrary to what you have seen in Midtown, things are very, very quiet here on Wheeler Avenue. Small groups of people have been gathering here throughout the day. It seems that here on this street, what was initially shock and horror has turned into sort of a reluctant acceptance of a verdict that this community considers to be a huge injustice. There was a smaller gathering today on Wheeler Avenue, much more subdued than yesterday's demonstrations that went on for hours. Today, people here called for the resignation of Bronx District Attorney Robert Johnson.
We want him to leave for his mishandling of the Diallo case and other cases of misconduct by members of the police department.
While cops kept watch up on top of the elevated train platform, others stood stone-faced on the street while the people gathered voiced their anger. One woman says she had belief in the justice system until yesterday.
Regardless of all the things that I've seen to the contrary, I said, you know what? When all is said and done, there can be justice for someone. And here was irrefutable evidence. Irrefutable, but it was refuted. He was rejected out of hand. He did something wrong. He had a wallet. How dare he?
At one point, Community Affairs Police confiscated the sticks some people were using to hold up their signs.
No, the signs are fine, but the sticks, they can get a summons.
That didn't seem to upset the crowd too much, many of whom came here to mourn and some to pray, although there is still the sense of outrage in this community.
I'm not hurt anymore. I'm angry. Because every year is someone else. Okay? They look who he plants here. Minority cops. You know? Puts the white cops down the corner and put all the minorities here. Like they're going to ease the pain.
Now, while many people are still gathered here in front of Amadou Diallo's apartment, it is very, very quiet here on Wheeler Avenue. As a matter of fact, people are going about their daily business. Since the streets are blocked off to traffic with barricades that police have put up, there are no cars parked here. Children are actually riding bicycles up and down the street. People are going about their shopping, doing laundry and that sort of thing. So all is very, very quiet, quite different than the scene here yesterday. We're live in Soundview. Darlene Rodriguez, News Channel 4. Linda, back to you.
Thank you very much, Darlene. One of the acquitted officers, Sean Carroll, is back home tonight with his family in Suffolk County. After 2 weeks of the intense trial, Carroll's homecoming was quiet and without public display. About a dozen police cars were parked around his house in a show of support.
Well, the political fallout begins now a day after the verdicts in the Diallo case. From a presidential contender to city officials, an effort to see how policy will be affected.
J.D. Dapper joins us now with all the details. Jay?
Yeah, Linda, Glenn, reaction obviously to the verdict continued not only in the streets as we've seen today, but also among the people we've given the power to change things, the politicians.
With another day of protests and anger and disbelief among some New Yorkers, the mayor this morning tried not to fan the flames.
The people of the Bronx last night sent a message on how people should react to a verdict in the criminal justice system, and they ought to be commended, particularly those, obviously, who disagreed with it, who would have the strongest emotional feeling.
I want to come up with some solutions. That's why we're here today with the speaker. My colleagues are standing here. What can we do?
And from leaders of the city council, a call for prayer and reflection, but also action, a demand that the mayor move on reforms and additional training requested by the council, in some cases, years ago.
We believe we do have the best police force in the nation, but we also believe that there are things that could be done to make it so much better. The Independent Police Investigation Board, for instance, if it would be in existence instead of being challenged for 3 years in court.
The mayor and police commissioner argued much has changed since Diallo was killed and that New York cops are now the best trained in the world. But the mayor went further.
But we also need people who spend almost their entire career or who stake their political calculations on attacking the police. We need some of them to back off a little bit and say, maybe we were wrong.
Reverend Sharpton?
Mr. Mayor, there were 12 members in the jury yesterday in Albany, but they're going to be tens of thousands in the jury November at the election court.
The verdict reached into presidential politics as well. Democrat Bill Bradley, who has made racial profiling a major issue of his campaign, reacting in Washington state today.
I was stunned by the verdict. I think that it shows that when racial profiling seeps so deeply into somebody's mind, a wallet in the hand of a white man looks like a wallet, but a wallet in the hand of a black man looks like a gun.
Now, Vice President Al Gore had no question and answer session with reporters today, so he was not able to be asked about this. Back to the mayor, though, asked if he would reach out to black leaders or be visiting the community today. The mayor said no, that the best thing people could do now is, and we'll quote here, to reflect on the trial, to take a look at the evidence, to watch a videotape of the trial. And that should, quote, allow us to say that the rush to judgment was wrong. The mayor's strong statement today about that.
All right, thank you very much, Jay.
Okay, we'll be back with more on the story right after this. Through the heart of Manhattan, demonstrators angry over the verdicts in the Diallo police shooting are marching. Let's check in now with Polly Kreisman. She is at the corner of 23rd and 5th for the latest. Polly?
That's right. Sources tell News Channel 4 that police reinforcements have been called in to surround the perimeter of City Hall downtown in preparation for the protesters' planned march to One Police Plaza. Now, I'd like to show you some pictures that we took just a few moments ago from our vantage point here at 23rd Street and 5th Avenue. Over 1,000 people marching down the sidewalk and on the avenue, protesting the acquittal yesterday of 4 police officers in the shooting death of Amadou Diallo. This began about 3 hours ago with a rally at 59th Street and 5th Avenue. From there, the protesters went to Bryant Park. At Bryant Park, things began to get a little bit more out of control. By the time the protesters were at the park, there had been over 50 arrests. At this point, they have well passed this Midtown area. They are, as we understand, on their way to the City Hall Police Plaza area. Again, we know that there were over 50 arrests this afternoon and tonight in this protest against the acquittal of the 4 police officers. I'm Polly Kreisman reporting live from the Flatiron Building. Back to you, Linda.
Thank you very much, Polly, for that update. And in other news tonight, the police officer who was cleared in court over shooting a squeegee man has been fired. Commissioner Howard Safer has dismissed Michael Meyer for violating police procedures. Meyer was cleared of criminal charges in the shooting of Antoine Reed in 1998 when the man tried to wash Meyer's windshield. The officer was off duty and leaving a Yankees game and said he thought his family was threatened.
Sometimes I feel that I am just so fortunate to be an African-American at this time in our country. My mother never was able to finish and even reach high school. Education is always the key to your future. Education is the key that you need to step into all different types of worlds. These are wonderful opportunities and these are wonderful times that we're living in. And if you aren't prepared on an academic level, you simply won't be able to take advantage of those opportunities when they do become available to you.
Linda Church with weather and Gary Apple on sports. This is News 2 Weekend.
Tonight's top story, thousands of protesters take over the streets of Manhattan to show their outrage at the Diallo verdict and other issues. Good evening, everyone. The protest started peacefully but quickly got louder, larger, and dangerous.
Demonstrators marched through Midtown all the way to Lower Manhattan. They broke through police lines at one point, then the group splintered off into different directions. Traffic was tied up all over the place, and scores of people have been arrested. We have expanded coverage of the fallout from the Diallo verdict. We begin first with News 2 reporter Emily Francis live at City Hall. Emily?
Well, Vincent, Dana, just a couple of hours ago, City Hall Park was filled with angry protesters and police, but as you can see, calm now has finally been restored. But those protesters kept police guessing for 5 hours today as they were wandering through the streets of Manhattan. But in the end, 87 people were arrested. They took their cause to a dangerous extreme. Over 1,000 people protesting the Diallo verdict hit the streets of Lower Manhattan. Hundreds of police in riot gear thought they could control the crowds. But leaderless demonstrators became unruly when they broke into splinter groups and led police on a wild goose chase. Some turned violent. Others were arrested and herded into paddy wagons for disturbing the peace.
You didn't say anything to us. You didn't say anything. You let us stay walking.
By the time they got to City Hall, a wall of police were waiting for them. But once again, demonstrators took a detour. Activist Victoria Stong said she was disappointed that the crowds turned ugly.
None of us want anyone to be unruly. We are here to make a peaceful protest, get our message out, to be protesting, but not to be disobedient.
But protesters like Malcolm Crawford say police gave them no other choice.
The way they're looking at people, the way they're laughing, and the way they're smirking, it's very disrespectful. And a lot of us have to go back into our community and our neighborhood, and this is very real. We have to face this.
The demonstration was supposed to be a loud but peaceful one when it started earlier this afternoon. 2,000 people, young and old, black and white, showed up at Grand Army Plaza. The crowd marched down Fifth Avenue. When they got to Bryant Park in Midtown, police thought it was over, but they were wrong. The protesters were in it for the long haul to make their point.
It sets a bad precedent. It's saying, it's a slap in the face. It's saying, well, you can do this and you can get away with it. It can happen again, and we have to make sure it doesn't happen again.
There were no injuries from today's demonstration, but this is not the last we're going to hear from protesters. In fact, Reverend Al Sharpton calls this an international case of civil rights violations, and he plans to lead a march tomorrow on the United Nations tomorrow afternoon. Reporting live from City Hall, I'm Emily Francis, News 2.
Thank you, Emily. Speaking of the Reverend Al Sharpton, he held a peaceful rally in Harlem today for Amadou Diallo. He told hundreds of supporters the acquittal is just the beginning of a long battle. Sharpton's calling for a federal criminal trial, saying that the 4 white officers violated the West African immigrant civil rights. U.S. Attorney for New York, Mary Jo White, is reviewing the case and will decide whether civil rights charges are warranted. Meanwhile, Diallo's mother urges New Yorkers to continue to fight for her son.
Nothing can replace Amadou. Nothing can bring him back. If his cause can help satisfy the future generation so that the people can live in peace.
What this verdict says is that we don't have the right to stand in our own home, and that a policeman can determine based on the high crime area, which is racial profiling, that we are a suspect and they can use deadly force.
This coming Wednesday, a march for Amadou Diallo in Washington, D.C. is scheduled. Dan?
No loud displays of anger in the neighborhood where Amadou Diallo lived and died. Just shock and despair over the verdict that cleared the 4 police officers who gunned down Diallo. News reporter Pablo Guzman has a story from Soundview.
While a handful of people showed up around midday where Amadou Diallo was killed to protest the verdict and call for the Bronx DA's resignation, more typical of the day after on Wheeler Avenue was the small, steady stream of people from the neighborhood and beyond who made what has become for them a pilgrimage. Most, like this woman who left flowers, chose to keep their feelings private, but some shared their thoughts.
I have a problem with Giuliani being mayor, therefore giving these people power to behave this way. And he better take full advantage of what's left of his term, because it's going to be very short, his political career after this.
This could have been my brother, and how could they endanger the lives of other people living around here? Their neighbors, 41 shots in this small passageway.
Scary.
It could have hit anybody. It could have hit someone sitting in their living room watching TV.
All through the past year since Amadou Diallo was shot, people have continued to bring their children here so that a tough lesson about life can be learned.
I have a son, and I have a family of my own, and this can happen to anyone. So I strongly believe that I have to be here to support the Diallo case.
I just wanted my young daughter to see what the dangers are out there. What is this world coming to? This is insane, and I'm trying to tell my young kids to say, look, you got to watch, you got to be careful, you got to, and you know, it's a bad situation, you know.
Even while trying to teach their children, parents express the common outrage.
They shoot first and ask questions later. It doesn't make sense. I mean, do they want black men to start arming themselves to protect themselves? I mean, if this continues like this, what are they going to do? I mean, what is a person supposed to do?
Now, that man's remarks may upset Mr. Giuliani, but what the mayor has to consider is this. That man is a moderate. That's how angry, responsible people are. From the Bronx, Pablo Guzman, News 2.
The 4 officers may have been found not guilty, but they are not free. Their jobs, their bank accounts, and their liberty still remain shrouded tonight.
The relief at being found not guilty was brief for the 4 officers. Almost immediately, their thoughts have undoubtedly turned to 1 down, 1 to go. The latter in the form of federal civil rights charges that have yet to be filed. But in the firestorm of controversy surrounding the acquittals, protractors like the Reverend Al Sharpton are already pressuring the Justice Department.
We expected to get less than justice. So this is not some after the fact. We went and met with the heads of the Justice Department before the fact.
Minutes after the jury's verdict, the Justice Department released a statement saying, quote, "We've been monitoring the trial. Now we will review the case to see what, if any, federal action is required." News 2 has learned that the head of the union that represents the officers will head to Washington, D.C. in the coming days to meet with Attorney General Janet Reno. That, as Mayor Giuliani, a former U.S. attorney for New York, says this case simply does not meet the criteria needed to bring federal charges.
But it's highly unusual and very extraordinary, which is, in essence, to try these men a second time for essentially the acts for which they've been acquitted and found not guilty.
Then there's the civil suit that will almost certainly be filed. No jail time, but it certainly could cost millions. Since the city has the deepest pockets, the Diallo family will go after it, but the 4 officers will also no doubtedly be named in that suit. Finally, the 4 could be kicked off of the force if a police shooting team and an internal affairs investigation concludes that they violated departmental policies. That, of course, assumes the officers still want to remain cops. Most in high-profile cases like this choose to quit the force.
The only thing for sure that's for sure right now is that the 4 officers remain on modified duty, stripped of their guns and their badges.
There's a lot more to tell you about tonight. Up next, fighting for their lives. We'll show you a dramatic rescue on the high seas.
And NBA star Anthony Mason runs afoul of the law again.
Plus, O.J. Simpson is headed back to court. Wait till you hear why.